Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1147 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. This was a weirdly hilarious chapter of One Piece. Honestly, the fact that it really couldn't be any more worse, and I'm just laughing my ass off the entire chapter, is probably emblematic of that. The Straw Hats and the Giants are getting washed, little children are being abducted, and I'm over here giggling. So I feel like I should probably discuss or rant about this. Like, you guys will give me one or two good rants per year, right? And we'll come back to it at the end of why I still really enjoyed this chapter. So we find out what happened to the main Straw Hat group. Jinbei, Brook, Usopp, and Nami following the conclusion of last chapter and their encounter with Gunko. They're all tied up but still looking pretty energetic. They don't appear to be hurt very badly, if at all. And the justification for all of this is that the God's Knights were ordered to not provoke the Emperor Straw Hat Luffy. So they've literally gone out of their way to not kill anybody. Because, and I guess they rightly assume here, you kill one of the Straw Hats, you have definitely provoked Straw Hat Luffy. But I think that there's no doubt that this setup is at least a little bit annoying. Because if you boil it down, I guess the best way to describe this is another example of villain being incredibly stupid. You guys know I like to play the middle ground at least a little bit based on what I think is actually true, and if you actually feel this way, you know, there's a lot of people like you. Readers like competency in both directions. Generally, the safe play in stories like this is to make both the heroes and the villains competent, but make the heroes a little bit more competent. So you're left feeling impressed about everybody. The problem that I see with this setup is that we as readers are very, very familiar with these Straw Hat Pirates. We've been following their adventure for over 1,000 chapters, and I think that it's fair to assume that the world government should be aware of their adventure just the same as us, because it's the freaking world government. They should know pretty much everything about anything. And they should especially know everything about the guy who wears a straw hat and has awakened the Nika Nika fruit. Because clearly this is an important player to the endgame, which has been prophesized for 800 years. So the bare bones of what the world government needs to know about these Straw Hat Pirates is that they make friends with people in every island that they visit. But here we even have a special case where these Straw Hats have already made friends with these people before they arrived on the island. Dory and Brogy and Hyruden, right? Those connections have already been established. I expect the world government to know this. We literally just had the Egghead arc where they were essentially rescued by giants. A lot of people were there to witness this, including, importantly, the Gorosei. So this leads to thing number 2, which I expect that the world government should know, which is that Luffy and crew are not ducking any challenge involving their friends. If you threaten Straw Hat Luffy's friends and he knows about it, you have already provoked him. Straw Hats are here, you've threatened their friends, the giants, you have already provoked them. You guys see why this just doesn't work? It really doesn't work. Unless the God's Knights and the world government are that freaking stupid. Which they must be. So I guess you kinda gotta wonder out loud whether or not Oda put himself in a corner here with the God's Knights, basically made them a little bit too strong, or at least their powers haven't been figured out yet, so for the moment they're a little bit too strong, that realistically everyone should be dead. And he needed an excuse why that was not the case. So annoying or not, I do feel like this is a genuine critique. I think that there were some things in this chapter that Oda wanted to happen, and he had a bit of a heavy hand in making it happen. So maybe you guys are wondering, like, what was the moment from this chapter that couldn't have happened unless the God's Knights captured the Strats without the intent to harm them? Because honestly, the Strats could have fallen out of their boat and you could have had this entire chapter and Summer's speech to all of ELBAF while the Strats are kind of regrouping. So what's been added amidst all of this? And in my opinion, that is the interaction between Brook and Gunko. Honestly, I've got a bit of a head-ass theory about this that is probably going to make everybody laugh, but the more that I think about it, the more I think that it's genuinely true. Gunko saw all the reactions to Loki and to Harold and took it personally, like she wants to be the most interesting and confusing character in all of ELBAF. But of course, y'all remember, since we talked about it at the time, there was just some weird moments with Gunko where Oda decided to highlight that she was big into music, and that her favorite song was likely a song by the Soul King Brook himself, New World. Well, that came up in this chapter where it's clear that Gunko recognized him. She says, "You there, your life will be devoted to making music for me. You belong to me." Brook meanwhile like, huh? Honestly, the fact that we already had Brook and Big Mom makes this moment even funnier to me. This is now officially a recurring joke. Dare I say that if Brook asks Gunko to see her panties, she might actually say yes. And straight up to me, Brook seems like he's down for anything. If it weren't for his allegiance to the Strat Pirates and them saving him and all that stuff, finding Laboon, like, he might be down. Let's not forget that Brook spent approximately 50 years planking. Being a music slave is probably not so bad. Nami, what the? She knows Brook's music? No way. Usopp, she's a Celestial Dragon and a Soul King fan? Jinbei, that's one hell of a groupie. So Oda is bashing us over the head with it. Gunko is a fan, and Brook is a rock star. So a question that I want to ask you is, in 99.999% of interactions like this, how do you expect it to go? Rockstar and fangirl. I'm sure you have a mental image. So then Brook continues to say this. My sincerest apologies, young lady. My Captain Straw Hat Luffy gave me a second lease on life. Since then, my loyalty has been to him alone. Gunko says, and if refusal means forfeiting your life? Brook says, I would sooner embrace death than live without honor. My first thought though, same as everybody else, is like, damn, some of Brook's one-liners are cold. Respect the Soul King. But we probably gotta remember that Gunko is a fan, so if we thought that that line was cool, she probably thinks the same thing. So maybe what happens next is really not that much of a surprise. Firstly, she attacks Brook in kind of a play-fighting way. It doesn't seem serious. We even get a comical panel a little bit after this of Gunko just stomping on Brook, which honestly reminds me of the vibes that like Nami has with a lot of the rest of the crew. I'm hurting you and you should definitely do what I say, but I still love you. Just the vibes that I had about it. But immediately after Gunko's kick, we get a small panel of her going, ugh, and clutching at the area around her heart, with sweat beads above her eye. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's pretty much only two ways that you can take this. This panel with Gunko clearly describes some kind of distress. It is as if she has been injured. So theory number one is pretty straightforward, and I guess we'll discuss this a little bit more later. But maybe she's literally injured, whether as she attacked Brook, Brook managed to attack her back in a way that we didn't see, but maybe his speed is off the chart. And or the damage that she sustained earlier, she is now officially reacting to it. Not a big fan of this theory, but it is possible. To me, theory number two seems much more likely. Gunko is a fan of the Soul King Brook. She is becoming Boa Hancock version 2. She's in love with a rock star, and his cold line has her heart fluttering. Look, I've been all jokes before now because I think the whole scenario is ridiculous and honestly hilarious. But this doesn't seem too crazy to me. I've spent the last forever countless chapter reviews talking about parallels in the story of One Piece between the pre-time skip and the post-time skip. Oda does this anywhere and everywhere. So like it or not, paralleling somebody with Boa Hancock is not outrageous. If you guys take yourself back to Amazon Lily and remember how those early interactions with Luffy went, basically it was Luffy being mean to her, and she liked it a lot. And this line from Brook really isn't all that different. So I guess that you guys have to decide for yourself. But I personally think Gunko reacting to some kind of damage is even more unlikely than Gunko being in love with the rock star that she idolizes. But that's just me. And honestly, this is hilarious on so many other levels, because right now, we're assuming that Gunko has something in common with the Gorosei, that she cannot be killed, she might be immortal. Bro, this is a love story straight from mythology. They've gone to hell and back to find each other. Some people are still gonna think that I'm joking, but I am not. Elite tier endgame pairing. Also the fact that the title of the chapter is What We Fear the Most, which is pretty much how most of the community is gonna feel about this theory. The meta commentary is on another level. I already know that I'm gonna get eviscerated in the comments for this take, so we're just gonna go all the way in, right? Like, should we be looking at Gunko as potentially the next member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet? Gunko really just needs a ship, you know, like the going Soul King senpai. We've said this 1,000 times, right? But the Straw Hats are recruiting members of essentially every faction into their crew, either the actual crew or the Grand Fleet. So why not a member of the God's Knights too? And although I know that a lot of people are not going to like this, it is also true that it's pretty apparent that Oda wants to establish the importance of music in One Piece. The drums of liberation is a kind of music. The religion of Nika involves dancing. And straight up, it would be a bit wasteful to ignore the fact that Soul King Brook is a global music star. Ultimately, music brings people from around the world in different places, different backgrounds, together. While you're out there planning the revolution and cursing the oligarchy, I can promise you that they're jamming to Kendrick Lamar as well. But yeah, like I said before, I feel like it's this that Oda added to the story that wouldn't really be possible at this moment without the lull and the action created by the Strat's capture. And quite frankly, this might actually end up becoming an important setup to whatever happens later on in this arc. So continuing the parallel with Amazon Lily, Boa Hancock fell in love with Luffy, but she didn't really realize it. And then it became a love sickness. So Boa Hancock was literally defeated by love. And I'm just saying right now, a big question the community has, now that it's been revealed that Gunko at least, probably all of the God's Knights are immortal, what is their weakness? Y'all are laughing, but in the last arc, Sanji literally told us that love is stronger than light. So I'm just gonna leave that there. But anyway, let's move on from this and continue my poorly thought out rant. Another potentially annoying aspect of this chapter is Robin and Chopper. A lot of people, myself included, thought what happened in the last chapter with Robin and Chopper was kind of strange. Hiding within Saul's hair didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. A lot of people in the comments suggested that the purpose of it was so that they could better save the children. But my thought was it's kind of required to take out Summers if you want to save the children. It seems necessary. And you'd figure they'd be better prepared to do this while Saul is still on their side and fighting with him. Also, you just kind of let Saul take one for the team. Also, this whole plan only works because you assume that Summers does not have the observation hockey in order to sense that you're there, which I guess that this chapter kind of confirmed. So look, I totally understand that Robin observed Summer's battle with Saul, and it's probable that she learned something that's gonna better prepare her to actually fight him. But on the surface, a lot of this seems kind of pointless. It's implied in the chapter that although Robin revealed herself, she probably shouldn't have done that, and it's more impulsive reaction to the God's Knights trying to destroy learning and the schools. Ohara's legacy. Just my opinion, and you can feel free to disagree, but sometimes when Oda attempts symbolic storytelling, it doesn't land. A lot of people looked at this from a power scaling perspective, and a what should actually have happened perspective, when instead you probably should have thought of this as a literal story, where Oda wanted to communicate things about the characters. Sometimes it's tricky to balance these sorts of things, and it can definitely be immersion breaking, and I felt it a little bit here. Seems like to me Oda went out of his way to paint Saul as Robin's father figure. He was trying to protect her no different than when she was a child, and so we got a moment of that. The title of this chapter is What We Fear the Most, and the chapter is largely about the God's Knights having captured and endangered a bunch of children. And I think that Oda finds it fitting for Saul to think of Robin as just another one of these children. What he fears most is harm coming to her. So Robin was hiding because that is what Saul wanted. But what Oda is trying to say is that things have changed and Robin has grown up. She doesn't need Saul's protection anymore. She has things of her own that she is willing to sacrifice her life for. So what we end up with is a mini recreation of Ohara. The God's Knights are here to erase the scholar's research. And while Robin couldn't do anything about it as a child, she can do something about it now. But unfortunately, with the way that Oda framed this, is that he also kind of conveys that, look, if Saul dies, that's cool. If the children get captured, that's cool. We'll patiently await our moment. But the moment that you threaten the books, look, the claws come out. Priority number one. You have officially awakened the demon child. Her past trauma is not going to allow this. So yeah, in the spirit of transparency and honesty, I just wanted to say that because I do think that a lot of what's been happening is clunky. I see the beauty of it from a storytelling perspective, but I also often don't want to treat One Piece like a story. I want to treat it as if it's actually happening and I'm living in it. And I really didn't like Robin and Chopper hiding in Saul's hair to begin with. But as is sometimes the case, it is what it is. What we have now is really what I wanted from the very beginning, but with some emotion to back it up as well. Robin is preparing to fight Summers. And if the kids weren't enough, the stakes now for her are legitimate and meaningful. Again, the title of the chapter is What We Fear the Most. And the moral, in my opinion, is multifaceted. On the one hand, if you're Saul, sometimes you have to let your fears go. Robin can and will help if you let her. Saul's fear for her safety ultimately probably held her back. And at the same time, for Robin herself, sometimes In order to avoid what we fear, you have to fight. But yeah, maybe the most fascinating thing about all of this is I'm still, I guess, not convinced that Robin is actually going to beat Summers because, again, all of this seems impulsive, so we still don't know how to deal with the God's Knight's immortality. Fights with Robin throughout the history of One Piece tend to be pretty simplistic. Does clutch work or does it not? In this case, my strong guess is it will not. So considering Summers' thorns, Robin's Devil Fruit offers her no advantages. Her extra appendages being damaged by these thorns are going to hurt her just the same. But I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't like the idea of this. Like, think throughout the story, how often has Robin been in a prolonged fight where she's actually getting hurt? It rarely happens. So no, I don't really think that Robin is going to defeat Summers, but I love that she's going to try. And if you believe that eventually the matchup that Oda wants is Sanji versus Summers, I couldn't imagine a better way to call him. Robin's job here might simply be to stall Summers long enough so that the books don't get destroyed, and Sanji can use his spidey sense to answer her distress call. Also, while she's pushing past her limits, the longer she lasts gives her more time to use her brain to figure out how to deal with him, or figure out a clue. And in my opinion, while we've been discussing the relationship between Saul and Robin, all of this is juxtaposed with the actual giant children. I'm sure that you and everybody else are in the mindset that we're here to protect the children. We must keep them safe. But just the same as Robin, they might actually need to do something themselves. And that is precisely what Colin is attempting to do. And all of this ultimately supports Oda's agenda and ELBAF, a strong theme of ELBAF about warriors, and why that mindset has value. From the moment that we met the majority of these giant children, they have been taught to fear basically everything. So Oda has trapped them in this logical puzzle. You fear violence, you fear aggression, you fear fighting, but you also fear for your own well-being and the well-being of everybody that you love, which inevitably might force you to confront your fears about fighting. So what are you more afraid of? So in a way, I think you can make the argument that what Oda is trying to say is that fighting is a tool to confront what you fear the most. A society which condemns violence, regardless of the context, has abandoned an essential skill in life. Anyway, I feel like it's getting a bit preachy, but do you guys understand what I'm saying? Oda is pitting fears against each other, in a way which forces us to think about the value of each. I think I said this before, but it bears repeating. I think that Oda's inspiration for a lot of this literally comes from Japanese history. Zoro remains one of the most popular characters in One Piece. But the downside of idolizing masters of violence is that samurai had a lot of power in Japanese society. It was to the point that if you didn't bow to a samurai as you were crossing paths with them, they might just lop off your head. So I'm not actually from Japan, I don't live there, I can only speculate, but it would seem natural to me for Japan itself to fear reverting back to what they were. And I suppose what Oda is trying to say here is, wait, hold up. Yes, there's some downsides to all this, but there was a reason why we idolized samurai or warriors to begin with. These skills were acquired in the pursuit of protecting the ones that we love, or our treasures. And then suddenly, next thing you know, you have the Edo period of Japan, where the commoners are disarmed and oppressed, eventually leads to the entire country of Japan becoming weak to outside invaders. Oh, and in the process of all of this, the borders are opened. But anyway, I could go even deeper than this, but it's kind of a difficult conversation to navigate. I think that you get the idea. I feel as though Japan is a really great example of the push-pull of opposing ideologies taken too far. And perhaps Oda is making an argument that extreme fear on either side undermines the healthy balance which could be the more desirable future. But anyway, let's move away from this. I'm pretty sure my rant from earlier is mostly forgotten because, as per usual, we went down a wild rabbit hole. But I told you guys, despite the flaws that I see with this chapter, and I explained, I still really liked it. And the reason is that this chapter was hilarious. I think you gotta remember, despite all the heavy themes and the intense emotional impact One Piece can have, it is primarily a comedy. So I said earlier that incompetency, generally speaking, is really annoying to readers. But that rule is ignored when you're telling a joke. In my opinion, a prerequisite to enjoying the entirety of One Piece is an appreciation of absurdist humor. Whether you like it or not, it is very much intentional on Oda's part. He deliberately violates causal reasoning, because it's part of his and part of One Piece's sense of humor. He's doing it in part because, it's where he wants to take the story, and in part because he hopes you might laugh. And again, another thing that I really shouldn't need to say, but I'm gonna say anyway, right? You understand the value of laughter, of smiling, and all that when it comes to the overarching story. It is probably the way that Oda will save the world of One Piece. And while this is true of every arc, I think it's going to be especially true in this one. ELBAF is going to eventually fight all its fear with the help of the power of laughter. And if there's any question about the nature of their god, Nika, I feel like that will be answered. But I suppose what I'm saying is, like it or not, if you want to appreciate One Piece fully, sometimes you gotta take it a little less seriously. Obviously, Oda tries to strike a balance, and that does not mean that you cannot critique it. But I feel like sometimes Oda intentionally reins in some of the heavy feeling of One Piece so that its identity remains. So for all y'all out there that are doubting my Gunko X Brook theory, nah bro, it's likely. Also, shout out to all the scary moms out there. It absolutely killed me that the Giants were fighting against all of these apparitions, ghosts, and skeletons, and anything that you could imagine that people would normally associate with fear. And then suddenly the moms showed up and everyone is on the ground. Hopefully a prelude to Bigu Mamu. And yeah, what else did I want to say about this chapter? Well, if you look at all the children, right, we pan to all the various children that are being captured. We got their reactions to what's taking place. And the common theme between all of them is there's only one that's really looking for a solution. Everyone else is hoping that somebody will come and rescue them. And or they don't seem to care. And I have a theory about this too. So you guys know that I was pretty critical at the beginning of this chapter review, and how the story sometimes plays out is a lot of this criticism is premature until you let Oda's vision play out. Or at the very least, your opinion on it would change if you knew where Oda was going. So specifically, one thing that I was critical of is the fact that the world government and the God's Knights should know that they have already provoked Straw Hat Luffy, because the Giants are his friends. But to bring up a theory that we made several months ago, this isn't necessarily the case. Because if you take yourself back to the Zou arc, when the samurai and Momonosuke were pleading for the Strats to help them with Kaido and Wano, Luffy didn't immediately agree. And basically, Luffy was not convinced that Momonosuke was prepared to fight this battle for himself. And he wasn't going to fight the battle for him. He was only going to fight the battle with him. So I guess a lot of these kids being entitled punks kind of reminds me of this theory. Luffy's not about charity. He's nobody's slave, and it's not his responsibility to do something for these people that they won't do for themselves. And this makes me wonder whether, if Elder Jarl agrees to the God's Knight's terms, if basically the battle is over. Just frankly, this whole setup of the God's Knights holding the children hostage and then specifically asking Elder Jarl whether he'll come to terms with them or not, it just feels strange. It opens the door that ELBAF might just surrender. And if they adhere to the pacifist philosophy, I guess that's what they should do. And then suddenly, if all of this comes to pass, it would make a lot of sense why the God's Knights are attempting to avoid provoking the Straw Hats specifically. And just honestly, wouldn't this be an interesting direction to take the story? I could just imagine a lot of compelling things happening because of this. For instance, would Luffy just let the God's Knights burn Ohara's books? Or does this need to be settled first? If Summers hurts Robin, would Luffy move on? Or as is the case with Gunko and the other Straw Hats, will Summers avoid trying to hurt Robin because of his orders? Then once it's established that the God's Knights pose no immediate threat to the Straw Hats, is the fight over? And how exactly would this work with Brook and Gunko? And is this the real reason why Oda made Gunko a fan of Brook? He needed one of the God's Knights to have a believable reason to be insubordinate to their orders. And I guess I'm just wondering out loud how the other members of the Straw Hats would react to Luffy making an order like this, which I do think that he would or could. We have never encountered a situation where the Straw Hats arrive and want to save people who may not want to save themselves. At least not since Robin in Enies Lobby and Nami in Arlong Park. And if you think back to Nami in Arlong Park, this is probably the best example. What did Luffy do? He literally sat back and said, all right. And I think that if Robin had acted like Nami, Luffy would have done the same. However, there was a big adventure to go find Robin first to ask her what her opinion was, and he kind of had an idea, and Robin broke kind of quickly. But I guess you can see why there's potential here for something new to happen that we haven't seen before. And when it comes to ELBAF's pacifism, I really hope that we get a genuine moment, like a big moment, resolving this before the Straw Hats act. Oda took the time to establish the new culture of ELBAF. It would be disappointing if Oda didn't get the most out of it. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say today. As always, curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.